Thank you, Mr Chair. I just want to take a final call to address two areas which I think are important and need to be commented on. One is the issue of long-term maintenance regimes, which the Minister alluded to in his opening comments. And this was an area where we received a large number of submissions and was probably one of the more contentious areas of this piece of legislation, and I think it is incumbent on this House to explain to the members of the public why the Select Committee went down the route that it did. We received, because what this legislation does, or originally did when it came in, was it had a mandatory long-term maintenance plan requirement and a mandatory requirement to create a fund in order to be able to pay for that long-term maintenance plan. We received a large number of submissions that expressed support for the mandatory regime, and we received a large number of submissions that opposed the mandatory regime, although all submitters were supportive of the concept of long-term planning and saving. Where we had contention was whether they should be forced to do it or whether they should be left to their own devices to do it. The mischief, I guess, which led to this particular clause, these clauses being put in the legislation, was that in the current situation, the body corporate is not required to, and often does not, plan in advance for repairs and for maintenance to parts of the building. And when you have significant capital development that needs to be done, this can mean a one-off charge to residents which is unaffordable and which causes them enormous anxiety. We then had the situation that my colleague Marianne Street referred to, where you get people holding out their vote. We've changed that voting threshold, but where someone would say, well, I know that the roof needs replacing or the outside needs repainting or recladding, but I simply cannot afford this cost, therefore I'm going to vote against it. So one of the things we tried to do was to put in place a requirement to make body corporates think longer term and allow a fund to be set up which saves for these developments which are going to have to happen in the life of a building over time, so that unit owners are not confronted with large one-off levies which they refuse to pay or cannot pay or struggle to pay. So we looked at three main options really about what we could do. Well, the first was that we could stick with what we were going to do, which was that the long-term maintenance plan and the fund were both mandatory. The second option was that we make the long-term maintenance plan mandatory, and the fund is also mandatory, but we include an ability to opt out by special resolution of the body corporate. And the third option was that we make the maintenance plan and the fund both mandatory, but both have that opt-out provision by special resolution of the body corporate. Well, I think we went down the middle route of saying that body corporates should be required to have long-term planning. We're talking about 10 years here. They should be required to plan long-term. They should be required to have a fund, but we would allow the body corporate to opt out by special resolution of the body corporate if they felt that it was ridiculous that they were being required to save large amounts of money. And again, this comes back to the entire reason for this piece of legislation, which is that the range of developments which are currently covered by unit titles law are so diverse that you need legislation that's flexible. I think this was a very, very good decision by the Select Committee, where we were going to require the maintenance plans to be there, we're going to require the fund to be there, but in those unit title developments where the owners decide that in fact they don't need to be saving that much for whatever reason, or they need to, or they could do it in some other way, that they're able to do that. And I think we found a good compromise there. Now, the only other issue that I want to raise in this part, and there were large numbers in this part, but I certainly don't want to delay the passage of this piece of legislation, is an issue around easements, which was raised with me. And it was raised with me specifically by someone who said that they were sitting there listening to the debate on unit titles and no one mentioned easements, and it was an issue of extreme importance to them. And if this person is still out there listening to this debate on the unit titles, I am going to talk about easements. And I want to thank the officials for their advice on this. The question that I was asked was where someone has you can even get my Hansard later, Mr Tremaine, and relive this experience. The issue was where you have private owners who have an easement over a unit title development, and the only way that they can get to their property is through that easement. So they're not part of the unit title development, they don't have any rights on that body corporate, but they do have an easement and they are not able to get to their property without that easement being there. Mr Chair. Thank you, Mr Chair. I'm not going to take my full time, I promise. Now, sections 40, 48 and 49 of this legislation do deal with easements. They make it clear that the deposit of a unit plan has no effect on any easement or covenant to which the baseland is subject, or on any easement or covenant that is pertinent to the base land. And I've spoken to officials about this and they've assured me that where an easement currently exists, that right would be upheld. I also asked them what would happen where land that wasn't in a unit title development where the easement was allowed but which subsequently went into unit title development, what that would happen to the easement. I'm assured that even though that's not covered by this specific piece of legislation, it's covered by the Land Transfer Act, that again the right of that easement is there and they would need the permission of the people who relied on that easement in order to take it away. I want to thank the officials for their advice on this matter, and with that, Mr Chair, I will sit down.